Everybody at some point in their lives has had to make a change that they were afraid to do. Now you're stuck in this place that's not comfortable. Some people are really scared of getting healthy because they don't want to go to a place where all of a sudden they're stuck with their thoughts. He's singing over and over again, like, I miss the comfort of being sad. And I think this is a really dangerous but common and unrecognized problem that people have. What do you do when you get the thing that you always hoped for and your life is ruined? Hey, welcome to the Create Unknown, the home of Make Something Mean Something. I am Kevin Lieber. I am flying solo, but I am back, and we have a nice little contingent of people here in the Discord, so it's lovely to see all of your familiar avatared faces. What is going on? That is the $1 million TCU question. What is going on? Well, in mid-December, in an episode that still hasn't actually been publicly released, but will be this week, hopefully, Matt and I discussed how 2024 was a bit of a tornado with all of the projects that we had and all of the work that we were doing with popular science, the documentary film that we made in Austria about the Polavision, and sort of getting all of our ducks in a row to do the job properly of revitalizing that channel. Well, since then, we're no longer working on that project, and Matt has had a series of like personal life things happen that can't be ignored. And all of a sudden it's mid-February and I'm sitting here and I'm thinking, you know what? It's time to just start recording again. So here I am recording the podcast. Thank you all for your patience once more and for not forgetting about us, because we did not forget about you. So for now, I will be hopping on and just discussing what has been going on in my brain lately. I've also been working on my book. That's my other sort of big announcement, and what I've been doing all this time here in the beginning of 2025 is that I've started working on Sleep Warrior again, which is a novel that I wrote. I wrote a draft of the manuscript like 5-ish years ago, maybe more, 6 years ago now. It's insane how quickly time goes by, especially when you become an old, grumpy goat like me. But what happened with that is that, I wrote the manuscript. It was not very good. It's important to be honest about that sort of thing. I did share it with some close friends and family and that sort of thing. And, essentially what happened was Tabor actually was the one who said, this is essentially an outline for several books. Like, this isn't a book. What you wrote is not really a book. What you wrote were like a whole lot of ideas for several books. So on one hand, like, good job. You have a lot of ideas. On the other hand, you can't really do anything with this as of right now. So what happened in the interim was just a whole lot of YouTube grinding, working on the podcast, working on Vsauce 2, launching the Mindblow channel. And then last year working on popular science. And, everyone that you look towards to get advice for writing when it comes to like novel writing, they all have very, very different methods and approaches to it. Some people will say, well, you just have to block out like 2 to 3 hours a night where, you're not answering emails and you're not answering the phone and you're not looking at anything, but you're just locked in and working on your manuscript. I was not able to do that. Like for me, the only way it worked was if I didn't have any other really obligations at all, so that my brain was just all consumed by what was going on in the story. So by doing Vsauce 2 all the time and my curiosity box work, which I probably should talk about and really haven't much, but a lot of work is going on with the curiosity box and sort of new business there. There wasn't any opportunity for me to just be like, oh, okay, at 8:00 every night, I'll just sit down and work on my book. Like it just didn't work that way. By the time I got to, 5:00, there would be more messages coming in about, cuts of a new video or a thumbnail. And there just never was a downtime. And you really only have so many decisions that you can make per day for your brain. And the decisions that you have to make, at least for me, when it comes to writing a story, they take like 100% maximum brain power. So I decided that I'm going to try to do that now and try to use 100% maximum brain power to get back into writing the story that I really want to write. And it's going pretty well. I've started from scratch. So I started from chapter 1, line 1, basically that entire manuscript that I wrote years ago is more or less scrapped because it kind of had to be. It was a useful exercise to kind of build out different ideas, but it really wasn't a book. So anyway, I am working on that. And in the meantime, something happened to me this week that I wanted to talk about for this episode. And what happened was, well, let me back up a second. So I read a study a while ago, like years ago, that most people listen to the music of their youth basically for the rest of their life, which was really interesting to me. So like whatever music you loved when you were 15, whatever bands that were really meaningful for you in your kind of like early pubescence, that defined you as an individual during that time of sort of trying to figure out who you are, separate from your friends and family, maybe, and you really get into whatever band, really speaks to you at that age. A lot of people just kind of lock in to like those bands and that genre, and that becomes their musical taste for the rest of their life. That is really not the case for me. That's why I found this interesting, because like for me, the bands that I listened to like obsessively when I was a teenager, I can't, it's not that I can't listen to them anymore. It's I don't really have an interest. Like I've listened to those songs so much then that I can just kind of play them in my head whenever I want. Like I know like that music is like ingrained in the marrow of my bones. So when I want to listen to music, like I'm not scooping out my bone marrow to listen to the songs that I listened to a billion times when I was 16 years old. So that's why, I listen to stuff like Archspire, which is a newer band. We had Dean Lamb on the podcast. Like I love those guys. I love finding new music. I went through, a big Gojira phase years ago. Haven't really loved their newer stuff, but I'm always looking for new bands because the other stuff, it's almost like to me watching a movie over and over again. It's like, I love that movie, but like I'm done with it. Like I'm ready for new stuff. Anyway, that's a preface to say that recently on my YouTube feed, an interview with Nirvana came up that I watched, and it was like an MTV News report about In Utero, which was their, big follow-up album to Nevermind, which was an album so big it changed everything, not just music, but the entire culture. And they were, Nirvana was trying to get away from being as kind of like clean and poppy as they were on Nevermind. In Utero was sort of like a return to being heavy for them and more punk and alternative. And it was noisier in a lot of ways. So that was the report. It was like, do you like this new Nirvana album? That's really all it was. So I was watching that. And then, of course, since I'm watching this thing in Utero, then I'm like, I got to listen to In Utero again. It's been so long since I've heard that album, which I love, by the way. Nirvana was by far my favorite band during these formative years that I'm talking about, 13, 14, 15 years old. I'm listening to Nirvana, and In Utero, there's a track called Frances Farmer Will Take Her Revenge on Seattle, which was not a song that I ever was like in love with. Like, it's a good song, but it wasn't one of my favorites on that album ever. But the chorus to that song, okay, is I miss the comfort in being sad. And that's the chorus of that song, is that it's this refrain over and over again. I miss the comfort in being sad. I miss the comfort in being sad. When I'm 15 years old listening to this song and he's talking about missing the comfort of being sad, I thought literally nothing about that phrase. There's no context for me to understand that phrase. I didn't find anything meaningful about it. Like, he might as well have been singing row, row, row your boat over and over again. Like, whatever. These are just, replace these words with any other words. And that was my reaction to that phrase. Well, in 2025, me hearing him sing, I miss the comfort in being sad, all of a sudden just like exploded my brain, okay? Because that is such a interesting concept that's very, very real and very powerful, and a real condition that people find themselves in. So first I want to talk about why he was saying that, and then I'll talk about sort of the connections that I made afterwards. So, after, like, Kurt obviously killed himself. If you know the story about Nirvana, they were nobodies. They were like punk losers from like Aberdeen, Washington, hanging out with the Melvins and, that whole sort of Seattle grunge scene. And then they turned into Beyonce. Ostensibly, they were the biggest thing on planet Earth. It's very hard if you weren't around at that time to explain how big Nirvana was and how different they were than anything else at the time. And it just changed the entire musical landscape. And like I said, the fashion, the culture, like people's attitudes on life, it was really, really insane. Like, just the devil may care nihilism of how like everything is contradictory and stupid and sucks. Like, that's pretty much what the 90s turned into with the grunge era. It was kind of just like a total rejection of everything that came before it, and was just saying like, this is all, like, everything is dumb. Well, In Utero, there are a lot of instances of lyrics that are like a direct correlation to the rise of fame that, Nirvana experienced with Nevermind, and like everything that changed for them by getting so famous. The opening line of that album is, teenage angst has paid off well. Now I'm bored and old. Okay. Now this is an important phrase to set up sort of like the rest of this discussion. So teenage angst has paid off well. That's obviously a reference to Smells Like Teen Spirit, which was the song that put them on the map and changed everything. A song that they came to despise and they would never play. I don't even know the last time that they played that live. They played it on SNL and then maybe played it live like a handful of times after it got popular. And then that was it. They would not play that song live like ever again. They did not want anything to do with it because it just like almost put a bad taste in their mouth how popular that song was. So anyway, so In Utero starts, teenage angst has paid off well. Now I'm bored and old. So like they got all of this fame. They got to the top of the mountain and looked around and they're like, now what? There was no place else to go. They got as famous and as much success as you possibly can in their artistic endeavor as musicians. And then Kurt's looking around like, now what? Like, now what do I do? So in Francis Farmer, this I miss the comfort of being sad, like to me, that is obviously a reference to like a state of being where before the success of Nirvana, he was in this comfortable state of sadness and mediocrity and anonymity and that sort of thing, right? Just kind of flying under the radar and grinding and, playing tiny punk clubs, and driving around in a van and struggling and all of that stuff. And now that he's not there anymore, now that he's on the cover of Rolling Stone and playing SNL and just the most famous person in the world, everybody loves him around the world. This wasn't just like an American thing. It was global. He's singing over and over again, like, I miss the comfort of being sad. And I think this is like a really dangerous, but common and like unrecognized problem that people have. So we've talked about my 600-pound life before on the podcast. Last year, maybe Matt went through that whole series, and he was really interested in seeing different people's struggles with gaining weight and losing weight, and sort of the reasons that they gained, the struggles that they have losing. There's a lot of like deep psychological interest if you're interested in the human psyche and people's relationships, the husbands that don't want the wives to lose the weight because they like the fact that they are dependent upon them. Like, there's a lot going on in that show if you're just interested in human dynamics. So one of the things that is a really big problem for these people when they lose the weight, almost invariably, is that when they no longer can just go to food to cope with their problems, because that's what got them to be 600 pounds, is that they have these issues, they're not dealing with them. So instead they go to food as a coping mechanism, not dissimilarly than an alcoholic goes to alcohol or, any sort of addiction. You're ignoring, you don't want to confront what you should. So you're putting your attention and focus into some sort of destructive behavior, some sort of like repetitive, addictive, destructive behavior. Obviously, for people who are 600 pounds, it's food. They have a food addiction. Well, when you're not allowed to be addicted to food anymore because it's killing you, so you have to diet and you can only eat, 3 small meals a day. You can't snack. Well, all of a sudden you have a lot of time to think because you're not shutting off your brain by ordering 3 meat lovers pizzas instead. That really is the situation that they're in. So part of the recovery process that you'll see by watching that show is that as they're losing weight, if they start slowing down in their weight loss, they have to go to therapy because working through their psychological issues is an incredibly important piece of the puzzle to them getting healthy. Well, some people are really, really scared of getting healthy because of this reason. Because they don't want to go to a place where all of a sudden they're stuck with their thoughts and they're stuck with the trauma that they experienced, whatever it was. There's often trauma, like at an early age, involved in these people's lives that lead them to becoming food addicts. That's not a comfortable place to go. That is a really uncomfortable place to go that they didn't have to go to before because the food was masking it. So I'm listening to this song about missing the comfort of being sad, and I'm like, oh my gosh, that's what that is. Like that phrase encapsulates exactly the position that these people are in, is that all of a sudden they miss the comfort of being sad. Like they miss the comfort of laying in bed all day and eating cheesesteaks and eating donuts. Like that was actually a really comfortable place to be. Now, it's an incredibly uncomfortable way in terms of their health and how their body feels, and they're in pain all the time. Like that's why they end up going to the doctor to try to get weight loss surgery and all this stuff. Like it's not like it's this paradise. Certainly not physically, but psychologically, it kind of is. Like it kind of is it is a happy place. I mean, they say on that show often over and over, like the only thing that they wake up for is to eat. And as soon as they're done eating breakfast, all they think about is what they're going to have for lunch. As soon as they're done with lunch, all they think about is what they're going to have for dinner. And then they go back to bed and that's it. So once you remove that, where all you're thinking about is what you're going to eat all the time, now you're stuck in this place that's not comfortable anymore. And so you are locked into this scenario where, yes, you miss the comfort of being sad. So I think that phrase is just fascinating psychologically, because obviously it was a very different circumstance for Kurt. So that's why the phrase is interesting to me, because it's kind of a universal feeling and a universal like human concept to be obviously scared of change. But that's something that people understand really, really well. Like everybody at some point in their lives has had to make a change that they were afraid to do, whether it's going off to college or moving back home from college or getting a new job or getting married and moving in with a significant other, like whatever it is. There's a million variations of being afraid of change. Something that it seemed to me, and why I wanted to talk about it, that is a lot less talked about, is missing the comfort of being sad. You know, it does tie in a little bit with the phrase like ignorance is bliss, I think. I can see there being like a little bit of a correlation there, and everybody knows that phrase. That's a really, really famous phrase, ignorance is bliss. What's interesting about that concept is that on In Utero, there's an entire song about that concept. So the song Dumb is about ignorance is bliss. So there was this just bizarre moment that I had all week, that kicked off with that one phrase where all of a sudden I'm like connecting all of these dots. I'm like, oh my gosh, like so much between the opening line saying, teenage angst has paid off well. Now I'm bored and old, to Dumb, which is all about ignorance is bliss. And then Francis Farmer, which is about missing the comfort of being sad. I'm like, all of these songs are about the same thing, which was, Kurt Cobain being completely lost and uncomfortable with his stardom, which is not that's not a revelation. Like everybody knows that was probably the main motivator that led to his death. But I think that a lot of people, whether it's someone on My 600-Pound Life or, someone who doesn't want to get a job and doesn't want to stop being dependent upon a significant other who works, or their parents or something like that, there's like a very real concern with missing the comfort and being sad. The other thing that I thought about with this idea, and this is going to be really random, or it'll seem really random, is in the 80s, there was a movie called Teen Wolf starring Michael J. Fox. I don't know how many people even remember that movie at this point. It doesn't seem like it's brought up very often, although I think that they did a remake of it. Is there some kind of like HBO Max or like WB Teen Wolf show? There probably is, and it's probably terrible. But the original movie was kind of about this be careful what you wish for idea. And in some ways, I think I miss the comfort in being sad idea, because that movie is about Michael J. Fox. He's on a basketball team. They're not very good. He really wants to get the attention of like the hot girl in the school who, is dating like the high school quarterback. Like, it's a very cliche. There were so many 80s movies that had this formula. I don't know why we were so obsessed as a culture in the 80s of like nerd jock dynamics. There's like half the movies in the 80s were about nerds and jocks. I don't know why. Teen Wolf is another movie about nerds and jocks. The ultimate battle in the 80s was between the nerds and the jocks. So anyway, it turns out that Michael J. Fox is a werewolf. And when he turns into a werewolf, he becomes an amazing basketball player. For some reason, nobody in the school is like terrified that this high schooler is a werewolf. Everyone's just like, oh yeah, okay. They just accept it. Like, yeah, he's a werewolf. That's not strange at all. Not only is it not strange, he becomes like the hero of the school. He's like dunking. He's doing like windmill 360 reverse slams all of a sudden as the werewolf. Like, he's an amazing basketball player in werewolf mode because he has, like super strength and speed and agility and jumping ability. The greatest basketball player alive is a werewolf. The point is that he gets to the top of the mountain. I'm going to use the same analogy that I used earlier for Kurt Cobain. He got to the top of the mountain, and like he kind of gets like the hot girl, gets everything that he ever wanted, and it kind of sucks. Like, it wasn't what he thought it was going to be, because all of a sudden he was in a situation where, people didn't really like him for him. They liked the werewolf. They wanted things from the werewolf. Now that he could be the werewolf and he could do things, everyone just wanted a piece of the werewolf. Oh, Andy in the episode chat says MTV made a TV series of it from 2011 to 2017. So it's obviously popular. It ran for 6 years. So I have no idea. I'm guessing that this Teen Wolf MTV show probably not about the same concept but maybe it is. Maybe it is. What do I know? I haven't watched this and I won't. And I'm sure many people listening to this podcast also haven't watched the Teen Wolf MTV show. But the original movie was about this idea where you have this dream of being like the most important person, of being the best, of being the guy that gets the girl, of being the best basketball player, of everybody loving you, and quickly you realize that this is not a really great place to be. Like, it's not awesome for everyone to just want something from you all the time. It's not awesome to all of a sudden be burdened by like a tremendous amount of responsibility that carries. To be someone that everyone has a spotlight on and is looking towards for something. And that's like 100% what happened with Nirvana, where all of a sudden, they were at the top of the scrap heap of everything. And, this guy from humble beginnings who kind of just wanted to play his music and be left alone for the most part was being dragged around to like, the MTV Music Awards and being expected to comment on this thing or that thing, and was a cultural hero. And it's like, I didn't ask for that. I did not ask for that. Like, I'm not equipped for that. I'm not prepared for that. I don't know what you people want from me, but it's like an endless amount of things. Like, everybody wants something from you. So that's obviously what ended up happening with Nirvana. But I thought it was interesting. I can't think of any other movies off the top of my head that really, because this is like sort of the opposite of the hero's journey, right? In some ways. That's why I find it intriguing, because it's not happily ever after. It's sort of, you get the thing that you want and everything, and it just kind of sucks. And then really the happily ever after comes from recognizing that, giving it up and then sort of going back to who you were before. That's what happens in Teen Wolf is like, I'm pretty sure at the end he like refuses to transform into the werewolf in the championship game of the high school basketball or whatever, and they win the championship anyway. So it's one of those like, you had it in you the whole time. You didn't need to be the werewolf, Michael J. Fox. Like, you were just great the way you are. I guess it's kind of one of those sort of stories. You didn't need this magical, dangerous superpower. You were special all along. Another part of that is like there's a girl who really likes him, who's like not the super hot cheerleader chick. She's just it's the 80s and it's a Hollywood movie, so she's also obviously very pretty. But she's just like kind of his buddy, and she really likes him, but he doesn't see her as being, on a pedestal, as being as glamorous as, the homecoming queen. This is just like his friend. And then, of course, by the end, he realizes, well, the homecoming queen actually sucks. And, she's vapid and just status obsessed and doesn't really love him for him. And, actually, all along, his best friend, who's a girl, is his true love. And, he gets with her. So there's that element of it, too. But what I mean by it not being a hero's journey is like, obviously, most of these stories that we kind of obsess with have to do with someone reaching the peak of the mountain and it being awesome. And that's kind of the end. It's like, you strive and you struggle and you fail and you get beaten down and, to the point where you're almost dead. And then you come back and at the end, you save the day and you save the world and everyone loves you. The end. And this concept of missing the comfort of being sad, I like thinking about, A, because it's a real thing, and B, because it shows how it's a lot more complicated than a Marvel movie. Like, success is not this one way, struggle up a mountain and then you're at the top and you're rich and beautiful and popular and everyone loves you. Sometimes you get up there and you're like, wow, this is actually way worse than the situation I was in. And sort of, what do I do about that? Like, what do you do when you get the thing that you always hoped for and your life is ruined? That is actually a really interesting problem to have. Like, maybe it's worth exploring and it's definitely worth thinking about. In the case of the people who struggle with this in terms of something like My 600-Pound Life, like, it's important to say that it's not better for them to go back to eating the cheesesteaks all day and being immobile and laying in bed and, using pee pads and commodes to go to the bathroom and having to have someone literally wipe and wash them. Like, it's not better to go back there. In no world is it better to go back to that. But it's a new struggle, and it's a real struggle when all of a sudden you are confronted by problems that you were ignoring. Because, oh my gosh, like, this journey that I'm on to get healthy is a lot harder than I thought, because the problem isn't just me making better and healthier choices with my food. The problem is coupling that with now having to get my mind right, because your mind wasn't right. And that's how you got to being super morbidly obese, which is the actual like medical term for someone who weighs that much. Your mind was not right to get to that place, but you were able to ignore it. You were able to block it out, but you can't as you're getting down to 500 pounds, to 400 pounds, to 300 pounds. And now you got to have excess skin surgery because you have all of this extra skin that's hanging off you, and that's uncomfortable. So it's a strange thing where as you're getting better, some things are getting worse. And as a result, you can find yourself in this headspace of missing the comfort of being sad. When they talk to the therapists, there are a lot of different therapists on that show. One of the, I think, most captivating phrases that one of the therapists used with one of the patients was that they have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. Now, that's a really important thing to think about because when they were super unhealthy, they were pretty comfortable as far as just ordering in food all day. They didn't really have to think about much other than what their next meal was. They kind of had other people to do everything for them. And as they become more independent, well, with that independence comes more responsibility. So it's a little bit of that Spider-Man with greater power comes more responsibility idea where, yeah, you're getting healthier, you're getting mobile, you can walk around now. Okay, now that you can walk around, why don't you go to the store and get yourself some food? Because actually you have to do that because you have to get more active. You have to walk more. So you have to get out of the house. Okay, now that you're getting out of the house, now you have to confront your social anxiety because now you're around a whole bunch of people and maybe you haven't done that for a long time. And you got really comfortable in the sadness of being alone because you didn't have to deal with the potential of, I don't know, falling down, embarrassing yourself in public or someone making a snide or rude remark to you because of your appearance, right? You were sheltered from that. You were shielded from that. Well, if you want to get healthy, you can't be shielded from that. You have to take risk. You have to risk that something is going to go wrong on your journey to getting healthier. So it is this weird paradox where, these people really, really struggle. And I understand why. They struggle with the healthier they get, sort of the harder a lot of things get. Because it's like, well, now you really should start going to the gym, You really should get a personal trainer. Like you haven't used your legs much in years and they're really weak. And, that's a huge problem for your heart. It's a huge problem for your leg muscles. It's a huge problem for your back. Everything, it's all connected. So you got to start going to the gym to actually build up your muscles again, which have, deteriorated to nothingness by laying in bed all day. It's like, okay, well, that's hard. Now I have to make time to leave the house, to get a personal trainer who I don't know, to go to a place I'm uncomfortable. A gym can be a really scary place, especially for someone who is so overweight, because in a lot of gyms, you're surrounded by the complete opposite. You're surrounded by people who are jacked, who go to the gym as like a part-time job. They're there all the time. They've been there for years. They're in the best shape out of anyone in the world, essentially. You have to go there to be surrounded by like the healthiest people when you are like really on the cusp of being one of the most unhealthy people. That's not fun. Well, who wants to do that? That's hard. All of this is really, really hard. All of it's necessary. These are the steps that you have to go through because the alternative is essentially death. That's not a good alternative. One of the things that's like really interesting and sort of beautiful about that show is there are instances in which the people lose a bunch of weight and then all of a sudden they find a significant other. They start dating, they fall in love, they get married, they start having kids, they have a family. So they actually do go down the road where they transform from being someone who literally cannot take care of themselves at all, like at all, cannot take care of themselves, to someone who now is taking care of a family. Like, that's a pretty wild swing that occurs with some of these people within like the instance of a year. In like 1 year, 14 months, they go from lying in bed all day to having a job and a wife who's pregnant. And now they have like real motivation and support to get healthier, to stay healthier, and to live their lives. That that's one of the things that almost all of these people say is like they have no life. They're just waiting to die. Virtually every episode begins that way. That's the state that they're starting in is I have absolutely no life. And at this point, I'm just laying around waiting to die. Like that is as bad of a scenario as a human being pretty much can get themselves in. Like, what else is there at that point? That is nothingness. And there's a lot of work and a lot of struggle that they have to go through to get to a point, and a lot of them do, in which not only do they have a life, but some of them are now looked up to and are like asked to speak at conferences and stuff like this as sort of like a beacon of hope, not necessarily as like a life coach or anything like that, but, maybe as like a guest of honor at some sort of conference for, people who are struggling with their weight, where they can stand up in front of them and say, look, this is where I was, and it wasn't easy. And I got a lot of support along the way that I'm grateful for. But, here I am. I can get on an airplane and sit in one seat instead of three. And I can walk around the airport instead of having to be in a wheelchair. All of these things, they just make as big as a difference as you can see, in anybody's life in a period of like 1 year. The transformations really are incredible. But the point of, this thought experiment and the point of what I wanted to talk about is that there is like a serious rut that you can find yourself in, where if you become sort of like enamored by the idea of missing the comfort of being sad, then you end up back in sad because it was more comfortable, but it's a cage. Like that like comfortable cage of sadness is not better. Like there's no way that it's better. I do wonder when I think about like what happened to Kurt Cobain, I think about the other contemporaries. I mean, a lot of his contemporaries died young. Like that was one of the more tragic things about that whole era of music is like, like all of those singers are dead. Lane Staley, he succumbed to his heroin addiction. And Alice in Chains wasn't around for very much longer after Nirvana was gone, a couple years. And then he just went off the deep end with his addiction. Scott Weiland of Stone Temple Pilots, he had Velvet Revolver and, he sang for a while, but, that caught up to him. He died young. Mark Lanigan died young. All of these guys got swallowed up. So, like, who didn't get swallowed up? One person who I'm kind of fascinated with who didn't get swallowed up is Trent Reznor from Nine Inch Nails. So, Trent Reznor was really in an incredibly bad, dark place. I would say, as dark as, Lane Staley, and probably not Kurt because he had this heroin addiction as well as just being unable to deal with his fame. And Trent Reznor never, as famous as Nine Inch Nails was, like never sniffed the level of adoration and fame that Kurt did. But like what did Trent Reznor do that I think is really interesting? One of the things that he started doing was getting involved in scoring music or movie soundtracks. I think that's a really underrated and interesting pivot that Trent Reznor made that essentially allowed him to continue to be a musician and an artist, but it was in a different context. Like it was in the context of, hey, like make music for this video game. Hey, like make music for this David Fincher film. Okay. What I think is important about that is that like he's still channeling that dark, deranged, disturbed energy, but in a healthy way, like in a way that is for a project that isn't insular. Because I think that that is a really dangerous thing with some of these musicians. God, like Elliott Smith. Elliott Smith is another one, like pretty much, he wasn't a grunge musician, but like very much was in sort of that peripheral scene of just like sad, sad musician who also took his own life. Like, I think when you're 100% swept away in turning your misery into art and people love you for your misery, it seems pretty hard to get out of that loop where now your job is to be miserable. Like the thing that got you famous was to be the saddest person. Like that is incredibly dangerous to be adored, to get rich and famous off of being like in the deepest trenches and abyss of depression. And how is that going to end well unless you figure out a different way? And just unless you find some other way to still be an artist and create things and like get the demons out of your brain and into some sort of medium that isn't you just self-reflecting in this negative feedback loop of how sad you are, of how hopeless you are. I mean, gosh, to stick with Nine Inch Nails, like one of their breakthrough album was called The Downward Spiral. Like this, like, I'm not making a metaphor here. Like, this is literally what this guy did. The album is called The Downward Spiral. The follow-up was called The Fragile. And that is like a 2-disc album of just some of the most hopeless music that you've ever heard. It's genius and it's beautiful and it's a work of absolute art. But at the same time, you can't keep going there. Like, how many times can you try to tap that well before you tap out? And I think that that's what happened to a lot of these guys, is that they were boxed in to their own like deep dissatisfaction with existence, which is really at the crux of what the grunge era was about, was just like a total dismissal and dissatisfaction with reality and the way the world works. And of course, themselves and how they fit into it. You know, there's that phrase anime, which sounds like anime, but it's not. Anime, which is actually a word that Tabor taught me because he had a class in college, I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, in which a professor used Kurt Cobain as an example to illustrate a state of anime, which I think is spelled ANOMIE. But it's just feeling like you do not belong anywhere. Like you have no place in the world. None. There's nowhere for you to go. Everywhere you go, no matter who you're around, whether it's your own family or your bandmates or people who you think are your friends, you don't fit in. That is a really, really bad place to be in. So I look to someone like Trent Reznor, or I look in some ways to someone like Rob Zombie. Like I don't attribute sort of the same, like nearly the same level of like hopelessness with Rob Zombie. But his career, like regardless of what you think of the movies that he's made, which, you know, for the most part aren't reviewed very well, But I found that his pivot, from, or maybe it's more like a tennis match bouncing back and forth between music and making movies. I think that that's healthy. I think that it's really healthy to be able to get out of your head, first of all, and work on something that isn't your head. Depending on how healthy your head is, I don't know. But if it's an if it's an unhealthy head, like Kurt Cobain's head was an unhealthy head, I think if he had any chance to make it out of the hole he was in, it it probably would have been some kind of pivot into something that wasn't Nirvana. Now there have been, like, if you know the history of Nirvana, there were plenty of rumors that the band was actually done. Like they were breaking up. Kurt didn't want to do it anymore. He didn't want to, be the rock star. He didn't want to do the Nirvana thing at all. He wasn't getting along with Chris and Dave, but I mean, someone who's in that mental state's really not getting along with anyone. That's probably why they are where they are. But I think that that probably would have been his only way out. And, same thing for someone like Lane Staley or someone like Elliott Smith. And they were so freaking talented that I think they could have been wildly successful in some other medium, whether it was staying in music and scoring movie soundtracks or, directing short films, writing stories, something else to get the creative demons out of their head that just took the pressure off. Because that's another thing about all of this, getting to the top of the mountain thing. It's like that pressure is insane. And I've seen it and I've felt it in my own little tiny, like minuscule YouTuber way of having the pressure of like, oh, like a lot of people really are looking forward to the next thing that I make. It's better be good. Like it better be better than the last thing, or else you are, you're washed, or you're a has-been, or you fell off, or any other phrase to someone who no longer has it. Well, that's a really thing. That's a really scary thing when you have eyeballs on you. Is like, yeah, you're Trent Reznor. You make a great Nine Inch Nails album. Now you got to do another one, and now people want that one to be great too. And maybe it's not. Like maybe you just don't have the inspiration that you had before, and you're just writing songs to fulfill a record label contract and get a thing out because you have to, and you put out a crap record, and now you suck. That's not very fun. It's not very fun to go from someone with, critical accolades who everyone looked towards as being the best. And now, we're done with you. And that certainly happens. Oh my gosh, in the music industry and in Hollywood, really rapidly with movie stars. Like oddly enough, this is such a weird story, but years ago, I was at a YouTube summit, and the like keystone speaker was Will Smith, who now, I don't know, is most famous, I guess, for slapping Chris Rock. But this was years before that incident. Will Smith actually talked about this. Like this was what his talk at this conference was about. He was talking about how weird it was for him to go from being the biggest movie star pretty much on planet Earth to someone who is kind of a has-been. I mean, at least in terms of where he was, because, he went from The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air to Independence Day, I'm guessing. It was like the next big one. Men in Black, I think, followed that. And then after Men in Black, which was a huge success, I mean, he had like, I don't know, 10 years. He had like a decade or something of just dropping blockbuster after blockbuster. And then it was kind of over. And that's what he was struggling with. So I found it fascinating because here you have an A-list celebrity, like a capital A-list celebrity. I'm in a room with this guy, and he's talking about how he's struggling with the fact that he just kind of isn't that popular anymore. you know, like, wow. You don't think about, I think most people don't think about these things. And you certainly, and I'm not saying that I, have an ocean of sympathy for Will Smith. Do I have, like a full eyedropper worth of sympathy for him? Yeah, I think so. Because that's got to be pretty weird. It's got to be a pretty strange place to find yourself in where you're Michael Jordan. I mean, this happens to athletes naturally because of age. And I guess in some ways it kind of happens to actors because of age too. But with athletes, like, you can't avoid it. I think it's Charles Barkley has a phrase that he says, Father Time is undefeated. Because no matter how great you are, eventually time catches up to you. And even someone like Tom Brady, who was winning Super Bowls at age 42 or something like that, like, eventually he's got to retire. Like, you can't play football anymore. You're 46 or however old he was when he finally retired. Like, no matter what ridiculous nutritional regiment and hyperbaric chambers that he slept in, and like, no matter what, like, blood treatments he was getting, eventually it's just not going to work anymore. You're not going to be able to play football against 22-year-olds who are trying to rip your head off. It's one of the things that cracks me up with. There's that guy on Twitter who's like doing everything in his power to live forever. You know who I'm talking about? His name is like Brian Johnson, maybe? I don't know if that's his name. I'm going to go with Brian Johnson. There's this guy on Twitter. I think his name is Brian Johnson, who does all of these like very experimental and bizarre things to try to not die, basically, and not even to age, which involves, gosh, I don't even really know the details of whatever supplements he takes every day, and he like barely eats anything except for, I don't know, Tibetan grass. I don't know what this guy's doing. I'm pretty sure that he like gets blood transfusions from, healthy Albanian orphans. I don't even know the lengths that this guy is going to try to live forever. And I don't even know why I'm talking about this. I just find it funny because it's like, well, what if you get hit by a bus? Like, I'm not I'm not saying, I guess I'm not saying don't try, but at the same time, it's like, well, I mean, there should be a limit. There should be, I think, some sort of healthy limit between trying to like minimize your health risks and then also, only eating Tibetan grass all day and literally stealing the blood of children in the hopes of, looking like you're 33 when you're 47. Oh, it is Brian Johnson. All right. So if anyone doesn't know who this guy is, you can look it up. Brian is Bryan. And he spends $2 million a year to look young. And now he's taking the blood of his teen son. Like, what's that kid going to grow up like? Sure, Dad, you can have some of my blood so that you don't like look older. I mean, holy cow. Like, talk about having serious issues with the flow of time. Like, I hate the flow of time. You know who my number one enemy is in the world? Time. I will do everything I can, including injecting my child's blood in direct defiance of the flow of time. All right. That's pretty much all I had for you guys this week. I'm interested to to hear what you think actually about the missing the comfort of being sad idea. Am I wrong about any of it? Did I miss something? Is there something that you wish that I had said that I didn't? Please let me know. And I'll be back. I'll be back. And, hopefully Matt will be back sooner rather than later. But until then, sorry for being away for so long, but we're back in your lives. And we'll see you, Space Cowboys.
Thanks for listening to The Create Unknown. We make this show with the support of our patrons. 100% of that goes directly to keeping episodes going every week. And the recent support has been amazing. Sidpoke, NRM, Venture Addicts, Weezer Good, you all really do make this show happen. Thank you to the Tots and the Dumpster crew, old and new, who save tiny little lives every month. And thank you to our grizzled, battle-hardened child infantry. Clemente de los Santos, Dan the Latch, Demetrius Andrews, Erica, Ferrykun, Jen Mefasanti, Kevin Menard, Mikhail Steinke, Monahim, Natsu, Penny Piddler, Ryan Steer, Ryan Kinder, Samuel Manser, Sean S., Sean Malone, and Tom Bidiover. And a tremendous shout-out to our elite baby gang commanders. Atrocious Scuff, Kat, Dojangles, Graham Robertson, James Gallagher, Jeff Davis, Orange Vanilla Coke, Patrick Pister, TCU's personal pilot, Andy, Ryan Carroll, Baseweight Vinthos, Yeetus Deletus, Jonas Walter, Nathan Robinson, and of course, Trev Stead. You are the elite. Thank you as well to our indentured servants, producer, editor Ben Webster, Minecraft mogul Laterman, Discord kitten wrangler Conrad, and producer emeritus Dan Yosua. Thanks to Baseweight for use of Created in the Unknown for the opening theme. Thanks to Electro Voice for giving us mics to sound good on top of it, and thanks to Main Gear for powering all our PC endeavors. The Create Unknown is an Unknown Media production in partnership with Studio 71.